I'm Joe Coulombe, and I founded the company, which became Trader Joe's, in May of 1958. Of all the people who were qualified to go to college in 1965, 60% in fact were, whereas in 1932, in the pit of the Depression, only 2% were able to go to college. Well, now 30 years later, these were the people who formed the mass market. I figured that their children, no smarter but better educated, might want something different. And so that was the first element, was that we would try to develop a chain of grocery stores, all we knew was groceries, that would cater to this newly educated segment of society. Small, but growing exponentially. And remember, I didn't want a big opportunity. The second element came when I read that the 747 would go into service 4 years later, 1970, and that it would radically reduce the cost of foreign travel, which it did. And this gave us the idea for the name, Trader Joe's, to evoke images of the South Seas. In those days, getting to Hawaii on a 4-engine DC-6 was forever, and don't even think about Tahiti. And that is why, to this day, the employees wear Hawaiian shirts and the managers are called captains and that sort of thing. We still didn't know how to bias the assortment in favor of educated people. And then I read that the more years of education you have, the more you drink. And so the first Trader Joe's was opened 18 months after the Iron Curtain fell here in Pasadena. And basically it was a pronto market, grown 3 times larger, with the world's largest assortment of alcohol piled on top of it. Why? Well, because in those days in California, we had something called fair trade. And so the price of all alcohol was fixed by the manufacturers, and it was a felony to break price. So you had a guaranteed profit. You could not compete in terms of price, so one competed in terms of assortment. Scientific American devoted its September issue to one subject. In September 1970, it was a word I'd never heard of before, the biosphere. And I read that, and I became what is now called a green. The term didn't come along for decades later. And I had a conversion on the road to Damascus. And we went in, we subscribed to all the things like the Whole Earth Catalog and Mother Jones and the Rodale Press. And one of my managers had been bugging me to go into health foods anyhow. And so in January 1971, we married the health food store to the liquor store. And that worked. That worked brilliantly. And that's how we got into cheese, and we got into fresh squeezed orange juice, and we got into vitamins. The first private label Trader Joe's product was a granola. With the wine trade, you're dealing heavily with doctors and people who are relatively well off. But now that we moved into health foods, we're beginning to see less affluent people, perhaps. And we also, at this time, got a master wine grower's license and began bringing out cheap table wine. And slowly, I began to understand that our clientele was more the school teacher type, And finally, this led to me to come up with the phrase that Trader Joe's is dedicated to people who are overeducated and underpaid. Journalists, classical musicians, museum curators, and that is still true. It goes back to 1967, the idea that we have a new class of educated people, but most of them don't have money commensurate with the years of education. I'd heard about a famous grocer in Connecticut, Stu Leonard, who operated with only 800 SKUs. A SKU is a stock keeping unit. That means a single size of a single flavor of a single product, like 8-ounce strawberry Danone yogurt. Okay. So we'd been operating with about 6,000 SKUs available to the stores. We didn't have room to carry all of them, but they were available. I went back and counted his SKUs. Stu was doing $100 million a year in a single store, 800 SKUs, and this is 1977. So it'd be like maybe $180 million a year today. And so we adopted a 5-year plan in 1977, and we said that at the end of this, we will not carry anything unless we can be outstanding at it. And to get there, we're going to have to slash the number of SKUs down to only those products in which we have such deep product knowledge that we know as much as the vendors. And by the time I left Trader Joe's, we had it down to 1,100 SKUs. Everybody says it, but nobody practices it. Turnover is the most expensive form of labor expense. Trader Joe's essentially has no turnover. People I hired in 1958, 59, 60 only began to retire 5 years ago. Our average full-time employee would make median California family income. In those days, it was about $7,000 a year. And we stuck with that. Well, what I didn't foresee was that all of you women would go to work. And so about 1967, 1975, median employee income was going like this, but median family income was going like this. But we stayed with it. This is the real secret of Trader Joe's and why nobody has ever copied it. It is possible to copy the merchandise or the Hawaiian shirts, but no would-be competitor has ever been willing to lay out the dough. It's an invention, and it's an immensely satisfying, because Trader Joe's, because we invented new forms of compensation. For example, one of my proudest inventions is the absence reserve, which abolishes the distinction between vacation pay and sick pay. It's just one, you have so much time off a year, and you can use it any way you want, and it doesn't expire. This is one of these elements of success of Trader Joe's, of doing things. We were the first grocery stores to sell health and beauty aids back in 1958 because we'd come out of the drugstore business. We were the first grocery stores to accept credit cards. And this is fun. One thing I advise people, as you move around from job to job, collect forms, employment questionnaires, refund checks, receiving tickets, Every one of these is somebody's solution to a real problem. A bank deposit form, cash and sales reports. Collect them because you will need them in your own business.